And you've spoken about the need to take risk and the kind of reforms that are required, land, GST, farm. But there's also the opposition to deal with, and Praveen Chakravarti represents the Congress party. Mr. Chakravarti, last time round, the government had a full majority of its own. They could muster a two-thirds majority and push through the bills that they wanted. And what the opposition thought of it mattered little. Now, in the changed circumstances, the opposition will have a stronger voice. And the point that Ridham Desai at Morgan Stanley is making, we're on the right path. We're being hawkish on inflation. And that if we continue and do some of these economic reforms he mentioned, by 2031, we'd be able to lift the per capita income of our country, and that is the way to go. It's not about doles, it's not about freebies, it's not about handouts. Your party is advocating a completely different approach. You know, Rahul Gandhi in the campaign says just give 8,500 rupees. That's not leading to anything productive getting created. You're not really building manufacturing. It's more focused on freebies. Ridham Desai argues that go down the road that you're going and prosperity will start trickling down to those who are distressed at the moment. Praveen Chakravarti, your thoughts on this?
Yes. So what, first thing I think, since we are starting with politics, let's first understand, or at least in our view, in my view, the big message from the election to the BJP was this: thank you for the temple, where is my job? This is the overriding message that we have to take away from the election. And it becomes imperative and important that we address this. We all have to first, I don't think it's a secret that we have a jobs emergency, a jobs crisis in this country. We have to stop this GDP charade. I'm not saying GDP is not important, but we have to just stop going by headline GDP growth and third largest and fastest growing and all of that. It is very, very, very clear. Headline GDP is not translating into jobs, livelihoods, incomes for people. And that is very crystal clear from data. And there is also a clear political lesson that we've learned. So now what I'm going to argue now is, we must actually, because it's a jobs emergency in this country, like a COVID emergency, we must actually come together as a nation. I would argue and call for a bipartisan consensus to solve this problem, the jobs problem. And I know the Prime Minister has retained a lot of his ministers, but I would urge him to actually at least change his Council of Economic Advisors and at least get some people who are focused more on the labor market and on the jobs issue.
How would you solve the job? Every government deals with the job crisis. How would you solve it?
Exactly, which is why I think you chose to read some sections of the manifesto. As member of the manifesto committee who had an active role in writing it, let me point out the ideas in the Congress Party's manifesto. The first, on page 11, right to apprenticeship. The right to apprenticeship idea was formulated. I had personally consulted with experts from across the world and in India, labor market experts, industry, youth, students, and we formulated something called a right to apprenticeship. Now, whether you want to call it a right, don't want to call it a right, that is fine, whatever the government wants to do. But let's pick up on the idea of apprenticeship for jobs. Second, we said, let us, on page 30.
No, but even if you get an apprenticeship, how does it lead to a job? You could get the apprenticeship and the company could tell you at the end of it, okay, thank you very much. It was good having you for a year, whatever period that apprenticeship is. How does right to apprenticeship by itself create more jobs, Praveen?
Okay, Rahul, you must read study the European, the German model, where apprenticeship leads to jobs. Apprenticeship today trains people for the job market. It skills them. It gives them dignity. Gives them on-the-job training. It prepares them for the workforce. Okay, so that's the way lots of nations have moved forward. So that is why we believe that the apprenticeship is an idea whose time has come for India. The next, we have a very clear idea in the manifesto called the employment-linked incentives. You may choose to focus only on the 500 rupees and the others, but these are also part of the manifesto that I'm talking about. Just as the government has production-linked incentives.
No, but can I pause you for a second on apprenticeship, Praveen? Let's imagine you do the apprenticeship and indeed you're upskilled and you learn enough. The company has to be in investment mode to be expanding its capacity to want to take in more people, which is the point that the likes of Kanchan Gupta and Rhythm Desai would make, that the companies have to be investing in manufacturing or whatever it is that they do, wanting to expand. That's when you can take in more people, or you could have this right to apprenticeship, dande ki zor pe, you get people trained, but there is no absorption capacity unless companies are in expansion mode.
Exactly. See, what is happening today is, I mean, these are economists, including, in the competitive, the JP Morgan economists have all said, basically we have a capital labor imbalance problem, right? So when this government goes out and boos semiconductor plants like Micron and pays it $2 billion to create semiconductor factories, which is taxpayer money, it creates 5,000 jobs. Put that in labor intensive. I'm not saying semiconductors is not important. It's very important. But let me tell you, $2 billion is not a big deal for Micron. Put that in labor intensive sectors. So I will point out to ideas on how to create absorption capacity for apprentices.
No, which sectors would you put it in? Okay, let's imagine that you got in a company wanting to invest $2 billion. What sector would you want us to invest in, given the fact that the Indian economy is relatively less competitive than the Chinese economy or less competitive than Vietnam in trying to attract investment? How would it be competitive internationally when it comes to exports?
Exactly, I'm coming to that. The labor-intensive export sectors are textiles, apparel, leather, and there is a particular idea in the manifesto, which is strategic mining, mining for strategic minerals, critical minerals. Of course, ecologically sensitive, but that is something that India can actually play a big role. And guess what? And we have said very categorically in the manifesto, we want to double the share of mining as from 2 to 4% of GDP. And what does mining do? What does strategic mining do? It creates jobs for unskilled. It's the only sector that takes jobs to people, not people to jobs. And it's unskilled. It's very labor intensive. So there are sectors where you put money and create jobs. And that is why we think the propensity to get carried away by headline GDP and all this drama and tamasha about world's fastest growing. I am not for a moment saying growth is not important. Growth is important. But whose GDP is this? That is the question.
Siddharth Zarabi has a question for you. Siddharth.
Frankly, more than a question, a comment, because Mr. Chakravarti, what is not clear is who is going to take those apprentices. You mentioned textiles. The world is now moving towards more technology-intensive textiles. There is a technology upgradation fund scheme that's been there for 20 years plus. I think perhaps more serious thought is needed. But Rahul, may I just add one point? Yes. Where the issue of job creation is very fundamental. Nirmala Sitharaman in 2019 as finance minister gave a very big tax break to corporate India, both for existing companies and for new companies. I think the larger question that we need answers from this government and hopefully the budget is, have those companies who have benefited from those tax cuts stepped up, both from a point of view of investing, that is private capital expenditure, and creating jobs? Because the logic behind that tax cut was that these companies would go out and invest. Private sector capex had taken a big hit during the second part of the UPA government because of all the scams and scandals. The first 5 years of Modi government were spent in clearing that up. The second Modi government gave that big tax break, but it somehow doesn't seem to have delivered results. And frankly, that's a question that I would like to pose to Kanchan, that would the government now in 2024, as it approaches...
No, but what can they do it? You can take the horse to the water well, then the horse has to drink the water. Now they've done what it could.
Well, maybe ask the question that...
Siddharth, we lost 2.5 years to COVID. Unfortunately, what happened was that the tax breaks came in 19, and what you're saying is exactly what the thinking of the government was. In September 2019, and then in February, March 2020, we went into COVID, and it took a while for us to come out of COVID. And I think that reflects in the job scenario as well.
That's why, Rhythm, the question that I'm raising is it time for the government, and that's what Rahul is asking, and maybe Kanchan would like to respond. Kanchan, is it time for the government to now sort of say that, okay, we've done what we could, corporate India, large, medium-sized, all companies, please step up.
Well, it's not only just a broad brush thing of corporate India. We have to look closely at MSMEs and SMEs. Look, I don't buy into this. I mean, it sounds very nice, this apprenticeship program. This is not a very original idea. I think in recent times, Mamata Banerjee tried this to sort of, create the idea of jobs. And she started distributing letters of appointment at special public rallies. And then it turned out that most of the letters were no good, because when people turned up at these places for apprenticeship, they were basically hole-in-the-wall operations. They were so small that they could barely sort of, honor their commitment. Or in many cases, it just turned out to be a hoax. So to say that we can start a grand apprenticeship scheme and there will be so many skilled people that there will be a demand for so many skilled jobs, it doesn't quite work like that. I mean, just to put things in perspective, 10 years of UPA rule, India witnessed plummeting jobs. I mean, it was growth without jobs. And then at that time we were told, but the GDP is increasing. So today we are being told by the same party that no, GDP is not important, it's jobs which is important.
No, but let's look at that broad issue, Kanchanda.
No, 1 second, Rahul.
Yes.
I mean, let's also get real about it. World over, jobs are shrinking. There's no percentage in comparing our job market with that of Germany or Denmark or some European country and say, see, they have got so many jobs and we don't. Our job market is huge, and we need way more jobs. Now, so obviously the question is where they're going to come from. I think we have to get real and start looking at options of employment. That is, I mean, what all you can do to earn a livelihood. There won't be jobs, and I know it's politically incorrect to say this, but the realistic position, and if Indian political parties, especially in the opposition, were to be honest, they would all come together and say that let's put our heads together, let's look at alternative modes of employment, let's look at not jobs creation in terms of 10 to 5 jobs, but jobs where there is a decent livelihood, and that would be the way forward. Not say that we need more factories. Of course, we need more factories, but large factories, as you see in China, for instance, they are not going to happen over here because of your labor laws, because of your land laws.
That's a very important point, and I want to put that to Praveen Chakravarti, that you need factor market reforms.
Last point, Rahul.
Yes.
Now, unless you sort of, you can't be a functioning democracy, a constitutional democracy, and say that I will just let the factory owner hire and fire at will, or I will not look at the labor conditions over there, or I will not look at the overall welfare conditions over there. There were riots in Bangalore. In Karnataka, there were riots in Tamil Nadu. And over job conditions, over salaries not being paid on time. Now, can you imagine something similar happening in China? So, we should get real. We should get, and this is something where you need bipartisan thinking, that there will not be sufficient 10 to 5 jobs with 90 days of paid holiday a year, of assured pension at the end of your service. It's not going to happen. And if it's not going to happen, or if it's not going to happen in a grand scale, what are the alternative modes of employment that can be looked at, that can be worked upon?
Okay.